Recently, I watched one of this year's big films, Weapons. It's a horror movie that deals with mysterious disappearances of children that rock a community and send a cast of characters in non-linear, intersecting narratives on a collision course with a sinister presence that has taken root in their town. We get 6 main character perspectives before the film draws them all fully together into its climax and lets everything fall into place. In terms of the plot, there aren't really any unanswered questions. There's even a voiceover in the introduction and conclusion that gives the viewer a more concrete understanding of what's going on and how to parse it. Before seeing this film, I had heard a lot about how people were reading into it and what they felt about its ending. A lot of people seemed like they found it confusing or disappointing, but I loved it and found it cathartic. I'd like to talk about why, and why in general I think this film is so good. Spoilers ahead, obviously. Weapons is, at its root, 2 stories you've heard and seen before, but presented together for effect. If you're familiar with material like the Blair Witch Project, the core conceit of the witch character and her possession of various people in the town who cross her path is going to feel familiar. Likewise, if you've experienced any story that involves hauntings or killings in suburbia, classics like Scream and Halloween, Stephen King adaptations like Carrie and It, even animated films like Monster House and Paranorman, you're basically primed for exactly what to expect from this film. On the other hand, if I had to compare this film to any other horror film, I might consider one a bit less obvious, like maybe It Follows. It has a pretty strong thread of social commentary that pervades every aspect of the film, which isn't uncommon at all for horror films, but some play into it more than others. Weapons is not afraid to be on the nose. It's not a film that is concerned with being too overt, which is good, because if there was no scene where the father searching for his son in a dream sequence saw a giant rifle silhouetted over the house where the children were being kept, or if the film was not titled Weapons, it might have gone over some heads. I think that tends to happen in art when you're speaking to something that is either so mundane that it's a permanent fixture of our environment, like white noise our brain learns to tune out, or when you're identifying a problem that has no name, and Weapons is doing both of those things. Incidentally, the son's name in that sequence is Matthew, and the number is 217. It's not just the time of the disappearances. In the new revised standard version updated edition of the Bible, Matthew 2:17 onward through Matthew 2:20 reads, quote, "Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead.'" End quote. That's probably not a coincidence, but what does that parallel indicate? Firstly, the obvious threat is coming from power. The witch's power is a metaphor for gun violence on a certain level, but in that context, the power of King Herod being invoked indicates that the children can still be saved, which is what Josh Brolin's character learns from the dream. It's also mysteriously not the only parallel. In 2022, the House of Representatives in the federal government of the United States of America passed H.R. 1808, an assault weapons ban, with a vote of 217 to 213. I've seen this parallel pointed out by others. After all, it's more relevant to school shootings, but it removes the context of the colon on the digital clock, which feels important as it points to a line that also references parental grief at the death of children, but which also contains a prophetic dream which Josh Brolin's character is experiencing. The relevance to H.R. 1808 was something I saw pointed out in an article for Fortress of Solitude by Gerard Sanders, but that pointed to a Reddit thread with comments about the film's metaphorical, well, subtext isn't the right word here, as I've already said. It's clearly challenging for people who saw this movie to decode what the metaphor here actually is. I'd like to share a video by a creator I know I reference a lot, but I promise it'll be really helpful to anyone who wants to understand this movie, or really any movie. It's about the film Annihilation, and it's by the channel Folding Ideas. I'll link it in the description. What I'll say here is that if you're too fixated on fitting things into a literal or rigid frame of reference, you're going to miss a lot of the meaning behind what a film like this is actually showing you. The fact that so few comments and sources that I've seen discussing this film actually brought up the Matthew 2:17 connection. Actually, I haven't seen anyone bring it up, but I'm assuming I'm not the first person who saw that and thought the same thing, sort of speaks for itself in terms of where we are as a culture in media literacy. I think the reason this is significant boils down to the film's social commentary. It's obviously the case that the characters and their expressions of grief and confusion, their refusal to move on, and their horror at their loss is all a portrayal of the effects of losing children, both one's own children and in the community, to gun violence. Gun violence destroys homes and communities, and the film shows this very literally. The connection to the death of King Herod feels important to me because his massacre of infant boys in Bethlehem, in response to the rumor of the birth of Jesus, makes it clear that there's a connection between salvation and power in the narrative of weapons. This reading of the film explains, better than any other that I've seen or been able to come up with, why the children literally rip the witch limb from limb at the end of the film. They're killing the powerful person responsible for allowing this to happen to their community. I think the film is pretty clear. In Christianity, Jesus Christ has a core connection to the salvation of mankind. In Weapons, the salvation of the community, of the children and everyone affected by this tragedy, from parents to teachers, comes from acting against those with power. There's a pretty clear thesis here. Powerful people, the film seems to suppose, did this to you and your community. They made choices, they took steps, they cultivated this situation, and it allowed them to live comfortably at the expense of others, including your children. That's gun violence in America. That's school shootings. That's weapons. But we're not quite done. The thing about art that always strikes me as so powerful is that it deals with the unconscious. Our minds have limits that sometimes prevent us from seeing the world as it really is. I've given a couple of descriptions of causes of that problem already, but there are others. Some problems are incorporeal, intangible, invisible, imperceptible. Some knowledge is kept from us not by sinister forces unknown, but by what we are already seeing. Sometimes the bigger picture is unavailable to us because of where we are looking. Even words themselves, from a linguistic point of view, create contours to our epistemic engagement with the world around us, including our societies and ourselves. By planting our feet, we set our horizons. What do you do with a problem that is so pervasive it feels inevitable, and such a tall order to fight that it feels impossible, when it expresses itself in ways you aren't prepared to understand? That magnitude of our inability to understand phenomena like losing one's child in a school shooting is present here in this metaphor. The witch kidnapping children also feels very intentional. If anything, this feels like it plays into American paranoia around human trafficking and child trafficking. Many people in this country who would never support banning guns are all too ready to advocate against that problem. But that anxiety could be a manifestation of suppressed fear and desire. Fear of death and loss, of course, and desire to solve a problem that cannot be named and cannot be overcome from within that mindset. We kill the witch because we can't ban the gun. This idea of a person as a monster who we have to destroy not because they've caused our society's problems, but precisely because they haven't, and because the thing that has cannot be confronted, is likely familiar to people who have ever used idioms about witch trials or burning witches. We burn the witch because we cannot ban the gun. Were it so easy. Importantly, this all represents an internal struggle to my mind. We're struggling not with what is literally impossible. After all, we could have something generally in the form of a large-scale ban on firearms in the United States or tighter regulation. It's not conceptually impossible, but only practically impossible to confront. Imagine believing that your freedoms came from a sacrosanct history, a divine right, a political structure blessed even by God, and then being asked to speak and act against it. How could you? How could you even possibly imagine that you would have to, want to, need to? The inevitability of it all is what's so torturous. Political pessimism isn't necessarily about foreclosing possibility. Sometimes a greater awareness of the problems with which you are beset can lead to a greater willingness to confront them. But this isn't just decontextualized cynicism. It's actively a form of denialism of our social situation. That, I think, is what so much of this film is about. It's part of why there's so much emphasis on whether or not the town confronts the witch. It's why she needs so much secrecy. It's also a great reason to use the witch on top of all the others. She needs to keep up appearances, needs to act from the shadows. If they ever saw her for what she was, well, that would be her undoing. So I recommend that everyone see and enjoy Weapons when they can. If this film, at a metaphorical level, is dealing with American gun culture, then at an artistic level, I think it's dealing with impossible problems, with losses we can't calculate and issues we can't confront. Can't is the operative word there, because we can't, and yet we could, and sometimes we do. Making the witch a metaphor for those kinds of problems, as opposed to having her more straightforwardly be a figure that preys on our need to project that anxiety onto something else, is a smart way to deal with metaphor, and I think it works in this film. What cannot be understood but must instead be expressed is precisely what art is for, I think. A film is not merely reducible to what it means, because in meaning anything, it means a whole lot more. Thank you everyone for watching. I've been on a horror kick recently, obviously. If you liked this video, be sure to check out some of my other brief essays about films I saw this year, like Superman, Sinners, Until Dawn, and whatever else I've talked about by the time you see this. Stick around for more horror stuff next year that I'm still working on. I have a lot of bigger projects in the works that I can't wait to share with you all. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and hang in there.